But we want to start, of course, with what is going on the ground in Ukraine.
Yes, that's right. It's been very difficult in order to parse what's happening on the ground. So we're going to do our best here. Let's put this up there on the screen. So initially what happened is that Russia framed its withdrawal from Kyiv and Chernihiv as a trust-building exercise. But it appears to have provided a justification for retreats that Russian forces had already made in the face of Ukrainian counterattacks. There's been a lot of parsing about what exactly is going on there with Russian movements around the city of Kyiv. Now, on the west, we've been saying, and the analysts had said that they had stalled there, that the Ukrainian attacks had pushed them and made it so that an assault on the city was not going to happen. Now, there's also some counter-analysis, which we're going to bring you in a little bit, which said that they never actually intended on doing this, that they wanted to go ahead and hold forces up there while they consolidated their gains in the east. It's very difficult in order to parse those things, but here's what the West is saying. Let's put this up there on the screen. This is from France 24 over on the European continent. What Western officials there in Europe are saying is urging caution over Russian vows to scale back military operations. It's seen as an effort in order to either spin what was already a strategic withdrawal in the light of overwhelming firepower and of attacks and death, but also it's possibly a strategic ability in order to make sure that the Russians are, in order to counterattack or even put pressure in different areas of the battlefield. And this is something which, again, in the West, what the Pentagon is going with, this is what they're telling reporters, always take that with a grain of salt, put this up there on the screen, please, which is that Pentagon, Kirby, he's the press secretary there, said that reports that Russia is pulling out of the region around Kyiv, quote, "We believe this is a repositioning, not a real withdrawal," and quote, "We should be prepared to watch for a major offensive against other areas of Ukraine." So this was originally framed by the Russians, Krystal, as a show of good faith in the negotiations of what were happening with Ukraine in Turkey. Now, originally, we had shown you in our last show that there appeared to be some good strategic headway there. Zelensky saying that neutrality is definitely on the table. The Russians, at least, on a little bit making clear that demilitarization wasn't really on the table. No more talk of denazification, and really just demanding Crimea, Donetsk, and Luhansk. So if that had been the case, then we would be in a better area. But with this current strategic withdrawal and some new comments Zelensky made just this morning, it's actually much more up in the air than that.
Yeah, so basically, to boil it down, there's three possibilities here. One is the Russians are telling the truth, and they are doing a strategic withdrawal as a trust-building exercise to try to come to a deal.
Right.
Based on the fact that we don't actually see that happening on the ground, that seems highly unlikely. Scenario number two is that, as Kirby and U.S. Government is basically saying, they are couching their withdrawal, the fact that they've had military struggles in these regions, as like, oh, we're doing a good thing, when really they're sort of defeated and they have to withdraw and they don't have a lot of other options. So they're trying to frame it as like, no, we could keep going, but we just don't really want to. The third possibility here is that it was always their strategic intent to basically draw the Ukrainian forces out and force them to keep their military engaged on these fronts when their real objectives have to do with the eastern part of Ukraine and with this land bridge to Crimea.
And that is what, there's a thread going around by Scott Ritter. Let's put this up there on the screen. And I consider this, at least within the realm of possibility, which is that in terms of arrow war and maneuver warfare, for those scratching their heads in confusion, dusting off their dress uniforms over the news about Russia's strategic shift, you might want to refamiliarize yourself with basic military concepts. What Scott here says is strategically, to facilitate the ability to maneuver between the southern, central, and northern fronts, Russia needed to secure a land bridge between Crimea and Russia. The seizure of the coastal city of Mariupol was critical to this effort. Russia has now accomplished this task. What he says is that maneuver warfare is more psychological than physical and focuses on the operational rather than the tactical level. And that what they were trying to do, the Russians, according to Scott's analysis, was to tie up a bulk of the Ukrainian force up near Kyiv, away from the Mariupol, and that they've now accomplished their core military objective. I think this is true in part. What I would say is they tried to do it but they didn't bring an overwhelming amount of force to bear. They hoped it would work out. And then, like all military operations, they have a plan B, which is retreat to your secure sectors down there in the east. I don't think, though, that they never did not intend on taking Kyiv. I mean, even Western intelligence said Kyiv is going to fall in 3 days, right?
Yeah.
So, some of this is too cute by half in terms, not Scott specifically, but others who are saying, oh, well, they always intended to do this. I'm like, I think they actually did want to take the city, but they also had, as any military operation, a plan B. So the core thing that you need to know is that this could be a strategic withdrawal by the Russians. It also could be a repositioning to launch other major offenses within the country. And in terms of their core military objectives in the east, in Crimea and the takeover of the city of Mariupol, they have accomplished at least one of their major objectives in this military operation.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it's a success. Obviously, in terms of the grand strategic, Russia becoming a pariah state, establishing a land bridge between Crimea and the east, was it really worth it? I wouldn't say that, but some Russia defenders and in the Kremlin, they might try and spin it that way.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think that we should totally ignore the fact that some of their objectives here going in, they are likely to accomplish.
Yes.
I mean, look, Ukraine was all ready to say, all right, fine, we're not going to do NATO. They didn't have to launch a war to get that promise. Zelensky was already tiptoeing right up to the line of basically indicating to them, this is on the table already. But in addition to that, I mean, Russia definitely is in a position now to more dictate the ultimate terms of however this thing ends. And the real sticking point is going to be over what happens to this territory in the east, what happens to Crimea. Last show we brought you, Zelensky made some comments that were pretty interesting. First of all, in the talks that unfolded this week, they basically said those pieces we're just going to put off the table for now in terms of how we handle these territorial issues. And, Ukraine obviously very strongly saying we're not giving up any of our territory to this, aggressive invader. However, Zelensky did signal, and he said this outright, that he recognized any military effort to take back those regions was tantamount to what he called World War III. And so it could be on the table that, all right, we're not going to recognize your right to these regions or that these are, independent regions now in the East. However, we're also not really going to do anything about the de facto situation on the ground. That could be where we're heading. However, there's still a lot of reason for skepticism that this thing is anywhere close to a conclusion, and that's just the sad reality. The new comments you alluded to before from Zelensky coming out this morning, he says Ukraine is at a turning point, and he also says there is no concrete progress on talks. He says, we don't believe fancy word constructions, we believe in what happens on the battlefield. He also added, we are fighting for freedom over tyranny, and that gives us the right to ask for tanks, planes, and artillery. So what Zelensky is saying is, listen, we had talks this week in Turkey. So far, no real progress on that front. And then we have the Russians. This is Lavrov saying,
it's up there.
Go ahead and put this last element up here. He says, on the other hand, yes, we've made significant progress and there's positive movement. He says Ukraine has recognized the need to give up on NATO. That part is true, but also that Kyiv understands, quote, the issues of Crimea and Donbass are settled for good. I do not think that is, in fact, the case.
I do not think he is telling the truth.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of posturing that's happening. As we said, I've tried to warn people before, there are many Zelenskys. Zelensky in the West, where he's asking for NATO no-fly zones in World War III. Then Zelensky in Russian, whenever he's talking to actual Russian journalists, he's like, yeah, we'll negotiate on NATO, all of this. And then there's Zelensky at home. So trying to parse all three of those different Zelenskys, luckily for us with the internet, we actually can see all of that, shows you this is a very dynamic situation. I've said this before, something that we spent a lot of time on in graduate school was looking at ceasefires. Ceasefires mostly fail, but the more attempts at a ceasefire that you have, the more likely that one will eventually end up working in the long run. So you're seeing here the swings and the ups and downs of what peace negotiations and posturing and all of that look like in the middle of a hot conflict and a war in Ukraine. Exactly what Russia is doing, we are not sure. It could be both an actual withdrawal per the immense amount of casualties that they suffered. It could also be a strategic withdrawal they planned the entire time. They have accomplished some of their military objectives, at least in part. Where do they go from here? Will they say, all right, this is enough? If we were to believe Scott Ritter's thread, then fine. This actually gives the Kremlin the ability to say, good, we're good. Let's wind this thing down, try and bring Russia back into the community of nations. I don't think that that's very likely at this point, given just the geopolitical situation. But that just goes to show you that we're at a real turning point in the conflict.
Yeah.
It's been exactly, I think, more than a month now.
Since 6 weeks.
Yeah, 6 weeks almost since the invasion actually began. And within all of that, we can now understand that things are either moving towards a bloody military stalemate or some sort of ceasefire. I very much hope for the ceasefire and the peace, but the stalemate, I would say, is equally likely.
There's one other thing that Russia has gotten out of this thus far, although at a grave cost, in terms of, the economic pressure and warfare that has been brought to bear on them and on their population, which is they really have found out who's going to stand with them in the world,
True.
Even under the, greatest duress. So, if they wanted a test case of whether China was really going to provide them sort of that limitless relationship and support, I think we all have our answer here. And that sort of information, look, it's valuable for us to know, but it's also valuable for them to know. So that's kind of the sad and depressing state of affairs.
Hey guys, we're going to be totally upfront with you. This is the most perilous time that we have ever operated in.
It is so difficult just to try to sort through the news, but even more importantly, to bring you accurate information as this wave of lockdown and censorship spreads across the nation.
Yeah, look, if you can become a premium subscriber today at breakingpoints.com, you're going to help us build out a vibrant, independent media ecosystem, which is free of mainstream pressure. We can't tell you how important that is at a time like this.
Yep, that's right. Go to breakingpoints.com to subscribe. We love you guys, and we appreciate you so much.